When I came back to New York City about 8 years ago, I moved back from the state of Missouri, and I was introduced to a gentleman who was a church planter in Harlem. And when I met him, he began to find out that I had a children's ministry background, and as we had conversations and they were looking for a children's ministry director, we had a meal one day, and he asked me if I would come on board and be able to help them develop their children's ministry. And I said, yes, that would be great. I would love that opportunity. I had been praying about some different children's ministry opportunities, and I started there with Renaissance Church. And as a church plant, 3 months away from their very first church service, I remember I walked away and I thought, I don't know any information. We don't know how many children we're going to have. We don't know the ages of the children. We have no equipment. We are starting from scratch. And as a church plant, you are starting from scratch. And as we think about revitalizing or maybe restructuring a children's ministry, there's a lot of answers that we may not know the answers to. And so some of those questions that I began to ask myself are, how many kids will come? How many volunteers will I have? I was new to the community. I didn't know anybody. What ages will come? Do we plan for 10 babies? Do we plan for 10 elementary age children? What do we plan for? And so as I thought about these questions, I began to realize that I still had no answers until the very first day came. We opened our doors and we saw who walked through. And I remember I had a room filled with about 8 volunteers, and I had rooms set up with baby toys and preschool items and elementary items. And I said, we'll just wait for the children to come. And then from that moment, we'll send you out to whoever comes. And so we walked into that with a lot of unknowns. It was a new community. It was a new context from the suburbs of Missouri to Harlem, New York City. And so as I began to think about these things, I had to begin to think about what is it of the unknowns rather than let's think about everything that we've done in the past and bring that now into our present. And so as we began to walk through this and was a new church, was a new community, we may have ages or structures of children that come, or groups of children that are different than I've had in the past, some new groupings or some new ages or some new opportunities, ministry opportunities that weren't in the previous church that I was at. And I began to think about one of the questions that or one of the statements that we may often say. You may find yourself saying this statement. I know I've said this statement before. You may have volunteers that have made this statement, but it's the statement of, but we've never done it this way before. We've never done it this way before. When a new idea is presented, but that's not how we've done it before. As we think about going forward, and if your church hasn't opened its doors again yet, and aren't holding physical church, there are a lot of things that are going to be different. And we could find ourselves continuing to look in the past and saying, but we didn't do it that way before. We've never done it that way before. And as we think about re-entering into our church buildings and reopening our children's ministry spaces, we may feel compelled to say, but we've never done it this way before. But we are in a state of, in one capacity, of revitalizing our kids' ministries, restructuring, and having to think through some new things. Maybe in your new context, as you're revitalizing your kids' ministry, maybe your budget has been cut significantly. Maybe you've been given a much larger budget than you have in the past. Maybe there are some of those changes. Maybe you're in a different context than you were before. You're in a different environment. Maybe you've gone from a physical church building to a tear down, set up portable church situation. And there's a lot of things that are not possible in a portable church situation that are possible when you have your own building. And so as we think about that statement, but we've never done it that way before, we can think about of not moving towards that statement, but thinking, how can we revitalize or start a children's ministry where we're at? I think of this time that we're at now it's sort of it's a forced reset in a lot of ways. We're having to reset the way that we do things, or we're having to reset our policies and our procedures and our spaces, and maybe the tools and the resources that we use. Instead of the one big craft supply box that we had, maybe now it's individual supplies with the children's names on them, and so that they have those supplies individually for themselves, and are able to keep those supplies just to an individual child. And so as we think about that, we can not think about how did we do children's ministry in 2019, but how are we going to do children's ministry in 2020? How are we going to do children's ministry in our new context? Maybe you're part of a church plant. How are we going to do that? And so as we look at this reset, or you look at the blank slate that you've been given, where you don't know the answers to how many kids will come or how many volunteers will come, there's beauty in that. You are given a blank slate, and you're able to maybe think of, in the past, we did that, but we're not going to do that anymore. Maybe there's a list of things that you want to do going forward, and there's a list of things that you don't want to do going forward. I know I had my list of things that I did in the past, and when I came to a church plant, I said, those are things that I don't want to do going forward. And so there's a beauty in this blank slate. There's a beauty in this new time and this time of refreshment. And so as we think about going into the future, and whether you're starting a children's ministry from the very beginning, there was no children's ministry in your church prior to March, or you are revitalizing your children's ministry, realizing during this time how important that children's ministry is, or having to reevaluate your current children's ministry because of all the changes that will come due to COVID. There are some things that we may be looking at in all three of those scenarios. You have maybe experienced in your own church, in your own communities, families that have moved, families that are no longer in New York City, children that came to your programming March 8th and before, that won't be walking through your doors after you return to your children's ministry spaces being reopened. Maybe there are families that won't return to in-person for quite some time. They don't feel comfortable coming or checking their child into a children's ministry space, or being in a physical building space with others. And so it may be quite some time until you're able to see them again. And so even when those doors open, there is the consideration of instead of either or, online or in person, there's online and in person. How do we combine that so we can reach all of our families? Maybe you had volunteers, core volunteers, committed volunteers, but those volunteers are also no longer in New York City because they've moved. There's a lot of, as we think about the future, there's a lot of unknowns of, I had this many volunteers before, but I don't know how many I'm going to have going forward. I've been working on my own volunteer list. And as I hear about folks that have moved away, or folks that have reached out to me saying that they have moved, my volunteer list has gone from about 100 to 81. And that's due to a lot of those volunteers that have moved and now live out of state or outside of New York City. And so these are the questions that we're asking. These are the questions that we probably won't know answers to until we hit the ground running and do the work of our children's ministries. But this kids ministry is so vital. Having those children and having these plans and considering this, and even though there are unknowns and there are some maybe some anxiety as you think about that, and some fears, kids ministry is so vital in the local church. It's having children's ministry in your church and having that program and having that place for your children. It's important because no matter what the age, there's a place for the whole family. As the church has grown, the needs of our community have grown. As we look at Renaissance, we now just celebrated our 6th anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and the church has grown. I think of all of the couples that when we first started, it was just them. They were married for a few years, and now they have one child. Some have 2 children. Some have 3 children. And so their needs in that community have grown. I've watched their their lives change and their rhythms of their family change. I watch the impact that it has on the families. I think of the parents that may have a special needs child, and that opportunity that they have to have that service, to be able to sit, to be able to have the word, to be able to rest in that moment, and to know that there's a place for their child. I think of the single parent who comes and has that child all throughout the week. And this is a moment where their child can be poured into by leaders that love them, in a space that is safe and in that environment, and they can go and they can rest. I think of our small groups. We see Jameson here. He's been meeting with a virtual small group during COVID. And we know that in those small groups, meeting in circles, there are friendships that are built, and there are relationships that are being built and happening with our children. And so this kids ministry is so vital. It is so important. And so we want to think about some practical ways that we can begin thinking about building, revitalizing, or thinking about the changes that will come once our doors open again. We want to first build a foundation and a strategy. I heard it said once that if you leave your children's ministry, if you leave the ministry that you're leading and it falls apart, there's no structure, there's no direction, it ends because you're no longer there. There was no foundation that had been built. And so what is a foundation that we can build that will stand that time, that even if you are not there, this ministry will continue to carry on, that the volunteers have the vision and the mission and the strategy, and they're able to continue carrying on that ministry when the Lord has moved you on to a new place and to a new ministry yourself. And so when we think about strategy and leadership, we want to think about this idea of these cones. When you see traffic cones, they move us in a certain direction. If you're driving a child to school and there's the pickup lanes, there's cones. It's directing the traffic that comes in, the traffic that comes out. In a parking lot, those cones help you know there's a pothole, so we're going to put an orange cone in the pothole so that nobody drives through that. These cones help us move our volunteers and our families and our ministry. These cones that we're going to talk about, they help move our families and our volunteers and our children in the direction that we want them to move. There's this quote that says, it's the effectiveness of your strategy, not the scope of your mission, that ultimately determines your success. And so your church may have a wonderful mission statement, a beautiful mission statement. Our church's mission statement is connecting people to Jesus Christ and to each other. It's wonderful. We stand by it. We believe in it. But that mission alone isn't going to direct people to connecting to people to Jesus Christ and to each other. It's the effectiveness of our strategy. What cones are we going to put in place? Figurative cones, so that we can move our children and our families in the direction that we want them to head. And so as we think about that, as a church leader, you have been put in a position to lead children and families in a specific direction. It's a good time to spend some time figuring out where you want to lead them. And so we want to spend some time. Where do we want to lead our families? What is the strategy? What direction do you want them to head to? What is the end result that you want for your children and for your families? And so we want to think about that and then place these cones to be able to help move our children and families in those directions. A strategy is a plan of action with an end in mind. That means you have identified what you want something or someone to be. You have figured out where to place the cones so you can lead people where you want them to be. And so today, I want to share with you a strategy that we use in our children's ministry at Renaissance Church. This is a strategy that I used at Two Rivers Church in Missouri, and that I've carried to Renaissance. When I first met with Jordan Rice, our lead pastor, I let him know, I said, Jordan, I'm an orange thinker. This is what it means. And he says, great, that sounds wonderful. And so this is the strategy that we have used from day one at Renaissance. There's 5 parts to the strategy. And in the beginning, it's not possible to do all 5 parts. We want to think about, as you hear this strategy or you think about your strategy, what would be 1 or 2 things that you could focus on to help begin that direction? And so as I share these with you, you'll begin to see where I thought in the beginning of, this is a strategy where I want us to begin in the beginning. And now even during this time of online and virtual church and children's ministry, this has been a wonderful time to be able to say, what are the next pieces of strategy? What are the next cones that we want to think about? And so having this strategy, as you think about your strategy, you may have 5 parts to yours. You may look at this orange strategy and say, yes, those are 5 essentials that I want in my children's ministry as well. And to think about what are 1 or 2 that we could do right now in the next 3 months to be able to place cones to help move our families in a certain direction. So as we think about strategy, we also want to think about programs and projects. So your strategy is what sets the overall direction of the organization. The strategy sets that direction. Because of this strategy, we're going to make decisions that are funneled through the strategy. The next part are programs. Programs are designed to deliver a capability that will help achieve the strategy. So if you think about all of the programs that are in your church, what are all the programs you're doing? There may be some programs that you've been unable to do during virtual church and this virtual time because we're virtual, and there's some grief and there's sadness and there's loss and knowing that we can't do those programs. But it's not the programs that will ultimately be the success and make and have that drive that growth of your church or help you build a ministry or revitalize that ministry or make changes. Those programs aren't to be the thing that builds that ministry, but they support the strategy. And then you have projects. Projects are designed to deliver outputs or deliverables that form parts of the program. So one piece of the strategy we're going to look at is partnering with parents. That's the strategy. We want to partner with parents. We want to equip parents so that they are the primary spiritual leader in the lives of their children. We as the church have 40 hours a year with our children. 40 hours. That's it. In 12 months, the average amount of time that you will have with your children is 40 hours. You can also think in your other programs where you have children. How many hours a year may you have with your Good News Club children? A parent has more than 3,000 hours a year with their children. Their time is so much greater. They have so many more hours. So how do we partner with parents? Do we program and do we do all of our planning 6 days a week for Sunday? Do we program to have a great and successful Sunday program? Or do we program Sunday so that on Monday, our parents are set up to continue the conversation during the week, so that our parents are set up for success and to have the tools that they need to speak to their children for 6 days when we have them for maybe an hour or an hour and a half. And so partnering with parents is the strategy. The program is something called the parent queue. Every Monday morning, I send a parent queue to our families. This is what we talked about on Sunday, because we know when mom says to their child on Sunday afternoon, what did you learn at church today? Jesus, that's what they get. They learned about Jesus, which is true. But what did we learn about Jesus? What was the application? What is that bottom line? What is the memory verse? What did you do in Sunday school class today? So the parent queue does that. It cues our parents. It informs them. This is what your child learned. And this is a conversation you can have at the dinner table tonight. You can ask your child this question, then have your child ask you this question. That's a program. The parent queue is a program. Now the project is this month during October and November, we are providing our families with a devotional series on the book of Exodus. We're beginning a new sermon series this Sunday on the book of Exodus. And so we want to be able to help our parents to have the tools to pour into their children spiritually. And knowing that our parents are at all different levels. You may have a new believer who is a parent. You may have a parent that has grown up in the church and in the faith for their whole life. You may have a parent that's gone to seminary. You may have a parent that has just started coming to church for the first time, and they're on this faith journey just as the same level as their child is. You have parents that are on all different levels. And so this project is to give our parents a devotional for 6 weeks, that once a week, for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, here's a devotional guide. And this is going to give you the resources that you need to lead your children in studying God's word as a family. We're going to give you a verse to read. We're going to give you a devotional to read. We're going to give you an audio clip to listen to, or a video to watch. And so as I think about that, that devotional guide is something that is a project. It's not the strategy. That devotional is not going to be the thing that is going to help us build long-term or make decisions long-term for our partnering with parents strategy. But the strategy is we want to partner with parents. So what programs are going to allow us to be able to do that? Maybe it's MOPS at your church. That would be a program that's supporting that strategy. Projects. What are projects that we could do? What can we put into the parents' hands to help them be able to understand how to disciple and lead their children spiritually? We want to help those parents take that next step. Maybe a father has never prayed with their child before. We can give them in that devotional. There's a prayer that can be read. That father may not know even where to start, but here's a prayer, 3 sentences. You can read this and you can pray this with your child. So strategy, what programs support the strategy? And then what projects can you spend your time, your energy, and your finances on? If you look at the projects that you do in your children's ministry, you can evaluate them. Maybe there's a lot of supplies and a lot of pieces that go into a particular project. You can look at that and say, do we need to stop doing this or do we need to continue doing this? Does this project support our overall strategy? So, as we get into this, these are the 5 points of something that is called the Orange strategy. This is a strategy that is a family ministry strategy. And in your notes, you'll see a website that's there, thinkorange.com. You can go to that website. You can learn more about this strategy. The beautiful thing is it is a strategy that happens to have a curriculum that supports it. So we use this curriculum in our church ministry from in our preschoolers, elementary, middle schoolers, and then when we launch our high school programming, we'll use it as well. But it supports this strategy. And there's 5 parts to this strategy. Integrate strategy, which is aligning leaders and parents to lead with the same end in mind. Number 2 is refine the message, craft core truths into engaging, relevant, and memorable experiences. Number 3 is to reactivate the family, enlist parents or caregivers to act as partners in the spiritual formation of their own children. Elevate community is the 4th part, connect everyone to a caring leader and a consistent group of peers. And then number 5 is to leverage influence, to provide consistent opportunities are created for students to experience personal ministry. And so as we look at the children's ministry, as 6 years ago, as I looked and I said, how are we going to structure and develop Renaissance kids at Renaissance Church? These were the 5 pieces. I said, we want to make sure our leaders are aligned. So in February, we launched our middle school ministry, and I met with Shawana, who's our middle school leader. And together we said, this is the strategy, and we're going to align all of our leaders. So her middle school parents, we're giving them a parent queue on Monday mornings. We meet in circles in small groups. Middle schoolers meet in circles. We have preschoolers that meet in circles. Elementary children meet in circles. We want to partner with parents. We partner with parents. We understand how vital parents and caregivers are in the lives of our children. We want to be able to help our children be able to go out and experience personal ministry. And we want all of our children to be connected to a caring leader and a consistent group of peers. And so for middle schoolers, we parents are saying we don't even have to get our child up on a Sunday morning. They just get up and they go to their small group. Our 3-year-olds, they need mom or dad to sign them in to Zoom to be able to join our small groups. And so it's going to change where they're at developmentally or where they are in their abilities and their age groups. But these are the 5 strategies that help us make each decision. One day we came to church. We meet in a public school, and so we use classroom space. And one day we found out that one of the classrooms wasn't available. And I was meeting with a couple of volunteers as we were doing setup as we do every Sunday morning. And the question was asked, which classroom should we use? Should we use 102 or 106? I said, well, which room will allow us to continue to meet in circles and have our small group ministry happen? And we said, both of them are good spaces for that. Great. then it doesn't really matter which room we choose, as long as we are using a room that continues to allow our children to meet in circles and to be able to have that happen. So through this strategy, this is how we can funnel our decisions that we have. This is how we can create those decisions. And so as we look at those five strategies, and we think about building a foundation and building the strategy, one of the things that we want to get our churches and our leadership and our volunteers to understand is that this is not childcare. Maybe you've been in a church that refers to it as childcare. Maybe the announcement is made on Sunday, we'll have childcare for such and such an age. Or maybe you have a special worship and prayer service at your church. Childcare will be provided. Maybe it's a Wednesday prayer meeting. Childcare will be provided. We want to remove that phrase childcare. We want our folks and our families and our churches to understand that this is children's ministry. So we'll be providing children's programming. Our children's ministry will be open. We'll be having our children's ministry happening. Middle school ministry will be happening. High school ministry will be happening. We want to be able to remove that phrasing of this is not childcare. We do not babysit. We do not just watch children. We teach children. We pour into children. And we want to think about it that way. And so through this idea of starting or revitalizing, and maybe your church has been a child care church. When we walk through those doors, when your church doors open, if they haven't already, we can do that intentional reset. This is children's ministry. There's different times and different phases when there are a couple of things that happen. We can think about what has already shifted. And when we think about what has shifted in the last 7 months, we can come up with a long list. When you think about birthdays and you have a birthday cake, imagine that there was a time when somebody who had a birthday would blow out the birthday cakes and they would blow all over the cake. I've heard a lot of people say, I don't know that we're going to do that anymore. That's something that has shifted. We never even thought about it before, but now, because of what has been happening and different precautions that have been taken, we may not be blowing out our birthday candles anymore onto a cake that we'll be serving to other people. We can also think about what could we shift intentionally. So we have a moment to shift some things intentionally. If it was a child care church, how can we intentionally shift that wording? What does your website say? What does your printed material say? What conversation have you had with your pastor or with those that do announcements so that we can say children's ministry instead of childcare? And so that is one thing we can think of. Also thinking about as you are developing or revitalizing your ministry, what are the resources and the tools that you use? What are the books that you use? What are the toys that you have, the dolls that you have? As you look at the illustrations and the dolls or the stuffed animals you have or the toys that you use, do your children, when they come to your ministry and they see these visuals before them, can they say, I see me? Do you have a diverse set of materials that you use? I love how in Orange in their preschool worship videos, they even have some of their little preschool children that either are in a wheelchair or they're on crutches. And so that if you have a child that comes to your ministry that also is in a wheelchair, they can say, I see me in that. I can worship God too. And so being able to examine what are the tools and the resources that you use. Crayola has come out with recently a beautiful packet of different skin tone crayons. And so I think there's about 44 different crayons in the packet so that a child can look at your crayons and pull a crayon so that they know that when they're coloring their pages, I too am represented here. Band-Aids have also come out with different skin tones of their Band-Aids, that when a child needs to have a Band-Aid, they can say, this Band-Aid's for me too. And so even examining all those tools and resources that you have and taking a look at the full picture of what you have in your ministry. So building that foundation. What is your strategy? What is the strategy that you're going to build, and how will you then make decisions? It will affect and it will inform the decisions that you make going forward. So we know that a strategy is a plan of action with an end in mind. So thinking about decision making amid COVID. as we think about a lot of the changes that we are going to have to make when we meet in person again, or even if you continue to meet virtually, figuring out what are the cones that you are laying down and what direction are you moving your folks in. So here are a few practical ways of cones that we have laid down in Renaissance Kids and Renaissance Middle School ministry. For one, for the first essential of integrating strategy, as I mentioned, our middle school and our kids ministry, we all think about the same elements, and then we carry those elements out in an age-specific way. So small groups. Right now we have 10 virtual small groups with 60 children enrolled, and I have 20 volunteers that every Sunday at 10 a.m. they meet on a Zoom call with 4 to 6 children, all within the same age group. We start at age 3 and we go up to the 5th grade in kids, and then middle school has their Zoom call as well. And so we all do that. We all send the parent queue, and then we're all going to be on the same page with how will we move a 5th grader to that 6th grade middle school ministry. When they're, how are we going to work with a 5th grader so that we can get them ready for the 6th grade? Reactivating the family, partnering with parents. What do our parents need in this season? Our parents are, many of them are leading their children with virtual school at home. They're working full-time at home while having their children on the computer doing school. Do our parents need us to put the Sunday school programming on them for them to lead? Or how can we show up on a Sunday virtually so that we can do just like we used to do on a Sunday? I thought about that with our families. The heart of Renaissance Kids on a Sunday morning was you come, you check in your child. We're going to have leaders that are going to pour into them, and then we're going to equip you for the rest of the week. So how do we do that? And that's how our virtual small groups developed. And then also when our small groups took a break, we offered a large group Zoom call. And it still allowed parents to sit, to be able to watch the service on their own, and be able to really jump into their service. And then it also gave a place for their children to have leaders in the church pouring into them. We led a virtual summer camp. Most summer camps were canceled this summer. Parents were planning all of the summer activities for their children. They were the camp counselor. They were the play buddy. They were the extracurricular leader. They were the swim teacher. They were everything. So virtual camp allowed us to give them a 3-day packet of here's a planned camp for you. Here's some fun for you to have with your child, and you don't have to plan a thing. The Exodus devotional series, and then also looking at December, creating an Advent series as well for the children, for the families to have devotions together. When we look at elevating community, that's connecting our kids to a consistent leader and our leaders and peers in their community. And so we do that with small groups via Zoom, thinking about those cones. So if one of our strategy points is to connect our children to leaders and to peers, then the only programming that we're going to offer on a Sunday morning are small groups, because that is the cone that's going to lead them. If a parent says, "What Sunday school today? What do you have for our child?" We have small groups instead of, well, we have small groups and then we have this large group option. And then there's this other thing that they can do. Our strategy is we want them to meet in small groups. And so we're going to offer that small group program for our children. And if parents want their children to be in a Sunday school online situation, then we need to get you connected to a small group. And we've watched that faith building and those peer connections. The most interesting thing has been is I've heard children meet on Zoom and they've seen their friends, or they've been asked, how do you worship God at church? One little girl said, when she said, on Sundays at church, we pray before we have snack. She said that in August. We hadn't met at church for 5 months, but she did not use the past tense. She said, when we meet at church, when we have church, we pray before snack. When they see their friends on the Zoom screen, they say, that's Jameson. He's in my class. They don't say he was in my class when we used to go to church. They're using that present tense. And so these opportunities, as we heard in the opening session, instead of saying, well, we can't do this and we can't do that and we can't do this, what things can we do right now? And a lot of this time is starting things. What are things that maybe you've wanted to do but haven't had a chance to? Here's an opportunity where we're using our creativity and we're creating new ideas and new opportunities, that we can think about those things and carry those out through the lens of what our strategy is. And then leveraging influence. We can still move our students and our children to experiencing personal ministry. I know back in the spring, we had our kids write notes of appreciation to essential workers, folks in our church that worked at the post office, nurses, doctors. If they had somebody in their neighborhood, I know a lot had befriended the folks that keep our parks clean. Let's write notes of encouragement, and they can share those with individuals. And then also writing letters to folks that are in nursing homes, knowing that the amount of visitors has been limited. And so how can we encourage those folks that are missing their families and not able to see them? And so thinking through that, as we think about what projects do we want to give our children, what programs do we want to develop, the question is, what is our strategy? Does it connect with our 5 essentials? Are we thinking about small groups? What programs and projects are we creating? And if they are in support of our strategy, then that helps us know if it's something that we should do or not. When you're starting a children's ministry, you have that beauty of you've never done anything before. It's brand new. And so you can really start in a fresh way with a blank slate. When you're revitalizing, it's that question of what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to stop doing? And what can we start doing? There will be some grief and there will be some loss felt for not continuing with certain programs, things that have been part of maybe things you've loved, things that you've really enjoyed doing. But if we're looking at this strategy, which will allow that children's ministry to grow and develop through the years, what are some things that we need to stop doing? And now, as we think about in these COVID days and looking to reopen our doors, what are some things that we need to change? If you look at the list on part 2, there are some ministry details to consider. And so these are things that you would need to consider for your children's ministry, but to add to it, we are going to need to consider things like temperature checks, different health protocols now. We're going to need to think about, we should be thinking about evacuation plans. What if there's a fire? What if there's potentially something terrible like an active shooter? What is the evacuation plan that we need to have in place? What are COVID procedures we need to have in place? If somebody tests positive, what is the procedure that we're going to put into place? And so as you think about starting or revitalizing your children's ministry, we want to consider, do we have these policies and procedures taken care of? What is it that we need to think about? Background checks, 100%. If you're not doing background checks, they must be done. And so looking at all of those different things, and then looking at the strategy. This could be a time when you consider that. If you enjoy the 5 essentials that I shared with you, you can find those on the website for Orange that I shared. There's also a book called Orange Essentials, and this goes through those 5 key essentials. Orange Essentials is the name of it. If you're looking to develop a strategy further, there's also the handbook Think Orange. This is an academic textbook, and so it will help you get into all of the nitty-gritty that you need to know about how to develop those strategies and what those strategies are about. Another great way to be a part of it is through the Family Ministry Diploma Program at New York School of the Bible. It's a program that I lead and that I teach. And on November 2nd, we will be starting our next course in the Family Ministry Diploma Program, which is the power of small groups for kids and students. We'll be looking at leveraging that community and getting our kids and students in circles with one another. We just launched a partnership with the Orange organization. And so we have a wonderful opportunity, which means some increased resources and potential that we have. And so we are working with Orange to be able to create that Family Ministry Diploma Program. As you look at it, if you go to the website for Orange, for New York School of the Bible, you'll be able to see the course that is being offered in Fall 2, as well as the Family Ministry Diploma Program. You can register online, and we would love to have you as a part of it. And in every session going forward, we'll be diving into one of these essentials. We'll have a 10-hour dive into what those essentials are all about, and we'll help you as you start or you revitalize a children's ministry in your local church. I'll open it up for questions. If there were some that were asked, we'll go ahead and see if we can answer those.
Thank you, Tanya. I didn't see any specific ones come up in the chat. So if you have a question that's weighing on you, you want to throw it in there right now very quickly, you have the opportunity to do that. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you for sharing all of that with us. It was challenging and helpful, specific resources and even almost like tasks for a checklist to say, okay, let's reevaluate. So I hope that people were able to follow along and really will take that to heart, because then there are so many different church ministries represented here that will benefit from that kind of growth. Somebody wants to know, how long is that certificate program?
It is, yes, it is. There are 6 courses that are a part of it. So it can be done in the 6th semester, so about a year and a half. So we're doing the first session right now, which is an overview of the essentials of family ministry. And then we'll have 5 sessions that unpack every essential individually. So this year, the 2 fall courses, the 2 spring courses, and then next fall, the last 2 courses will be offered. The beauty of it, those are core courses, so they'll be repeated. So if you jump in for fall 2 or say spring 1, you can, at the end, you can come back around and catch the others. But it will be 6, that was 7 figures, 6 courses in total.
Thank you. And it says, do you get a degree or certificate? You said it was this, go ahead.
Yes, you'll get the family ministry diploma from New York School of the Bible. You will receive that. Yes, and I just put in the chat the actual link to it as well. And what I'll do is, before we sign off on the Zoom, I'm going to go ahead and put also a link into the slides so that you'll be able to grab those slides as well. So before the Zoom ends, I'll just do a couple technical things real quick and share that.